1947 was a year of infamy in terms of the New World Order agenda. 1947 was the time when profound events were taking place: the birth of the horrible U.S. military intelligence complex, the probable continuation of the Nazi regime, and likely ET visitation. As the year 2017 comes to an end, and we close out the 70-year anniversary of the year of 1947, it is worth briefly looking back on that momentous year at some of the events that transpired then which still have a profound effect on our world today. 1947, Operation High Jump. Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water. No, I'm not referring to Jaws, but rather the US-UK-Australian military expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd in January and February of 1947. He thought it would be safe to go down to Antarctica, but he was overpowered and beat a hasty retreat. Byrd led around 4,700 troops in an invasion of Antarctica, but his forces encountered heavy resistance to their Antarctic venture from flying saucers. The mission that was meant to be many months long ended abruptly after just 8 weeks. Some have speculated Byrd ran into ETs. However, given all the information we now have about the Nazis, it may be more likely he ran into the Nazis themselves. Was Byrd stalking the Nazis? This is an excerpt from a report in a local Chilean newspaper El Mercurio on Wednesday, March 5, 1947. Admiral Richard E. Byrd warned today that the United States should adopt measures of protection against the possibility of an invasion of the country by hostile planes coming from the polar regions. The admiral explained that he was not trying to scare anyone, but the cruel reality is that in case of a new war, the United States could be attacked by planes flying over one or both poles. This is what Byrd is said to have testified before Congress. In case of a new war, the U.S. would be attacked by fighters that are able to fly from one pole to the other with incredible speed. Those interested in further reading may like to delve into Genesis of the Space Race, The Inner Earth and the Extraterrestrials and Genesis for the New Space Age by John Leith. 1947, The Roswell Incident. The theme of flying saucers, UFOs and anti-gravity craft, and whether they were of terrestrial, German, or extraterrestrial origin, was brought up once again in 1947 with the infamous Roswell incident or Roswell crash. On 7th of July 1947, at least one, but perhaps two or three, UFOs reportedly crashed in the small town of Roswell, New Mexico, USA. The military put out a bogus cover story of a crashed weather balloon. In 1978, UFO expert Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Jesse Marcel, who was involved with the original recovery of the debris. Marcel stated that the military had covered up the recovery of an alien spacecraft, as well as alien life forms. Retired military officer Chuck Wade painstakingly compiled compelling evidence of multiple crashed UFOs in the New Mexico area. He believed there was not just one UFO in the Roswell crash, but rather multiple craft and multiple crash sites. Philip Corso Jr. was a person very close to the situation as it was unfolding in 1947 and afterwards. He knew about the reality of advanced extraterrestrial technology. After the Roswell incident, Corso was put in charge of figuring out what to do. He claims that Nazi scientists, via CIA Project Paperclip, worked for him, that Majestic 12, see below, reported to him, and he reported to then-President Eisenhower, and that later President Reagan often consulted him. He also claims that humans cannot go into space, biologically, and that NASA knows this, that he was contacted by at least 2 ET groups through telepathy, that the Cold War was mainly a war of UFOs, with Russia-US aligned against some groups of ETs, that the Roswell UFO cover-up is a time travel cover-up, and that there would be a time capsule opened in Roswell in 2047. Of course, there has been much speculation and theorizing about what really happened at Roswell on that fateful day. Some such as Corso believe the most important piece of the puzzle was the military trying to cover up time travel, and even that the pilots and passengers of those craft were not necessarily gray ETs but future humans. Another theory is described in the account of Matilda O'Donnell McElroy, E.G., as found in the book Alien Interview by Lawrence Spencer, a female Army officer, nurse, who was purportedly brought in to communicate with the pilots of the crashed craft. She reveals her conversation with an alien, which called itself Errol, who was asexual, looked like a typical gray alien and operated by telepathy. Its body was not exactly biological or mechanical. It seemed its spacecraft and body was connected directly to it through some kind of electrical nervous system that it controlled with its thoughts. In 1947, Truman signs the National Security Act. One way or another, Operation Highjump and the Roswell incident must have had a huge psychological impact upon Truman and the U.S. ruling cabal, because later that year, Truman signed legislation that gave birth to what would become a domestic and international monster, the U.S. MIC, Military Intelligence Complex. The National Security Act took effect September 18, 1947 and reorganized the U.S. Defense and Intelligence Agencies. The Act and its subsequent amendments restructured the intelligence community, reorganized the Department of Defense, established the NSC, National Security Council, established the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, see below, split the Department of War into the Department of the Army and Department of the Air Force. The American Air Force used to be part of the Army, established the NME, National Military Establishment, established the position of DNI, Director of National Intelligence, who is the director of the entire intelligence community and the principal advisor to the President. It was later amended in 1949 to further consolidate and centralize control of the military, by making the Secretaries of the Army, Navy and Air Force subordinate to the Secretary of Defense in the chain of command, and renaming the NME as the Department of Defense. 1947, formation of the CIA, the most devastating and destructive intelligence agency in world history. As stated above, with the signing of the National Security Act, the CIA came into being on September 18, 1947, arising out of the ashes of its forerunner the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. The OSS, run by Wild Bill Donovan, was a wartime intelligence agency during World War II which engaged in espionage, propaganda, subversion and post-war planning. It is difficult to aptly summarize just how nefarious, morally bankrupt, wicked and murderous the CIA has been since its 1947 inception. It quickly became an out-of-control agency, so much so that by the time Kennedy assumed office at the start of 1961, Eisenhower was already warning him that he better be careful of both the CIA and the entire MI. JFK was the last person to seriously challenge the agency, and it is no coincidence he ended up dead just a few years later. For details on how the CIA was centrally involved in his murder, see my series on the JFK assassination. The CIA is the company responsible for countless assassinations and instances of gun and drug running. Ex-CIA agents such as Victor Marchetti who have worked there talk about the CIA as a cult of intelligence, such as former CIA Chief William Colby, who said, "They cliqued together, forming a sealed fraternity. They developed a rather skewed view of that world. They looked down on the life of the rest of the citizenry, an inbred, distorted, elitist view of intelligence that held itself to be, beyond the restraints of the Constitution. The CIA spies, relentlessly, invasively, on all Americans and beyond." WikiLeaks published the Vault 7 CIA documents, the biggest leak in CIA history, which were a shocking and damning collection proving that the CIA hacks all U.S. electronic devices, phones, computers, smart TVs, to listen to conversations anywhere. Vault 7 also proved the CIA hacks vehicles to remotely control them, in order to carry out undetectable assassinations. The CIA's primary activities, aside from doing the job it's supposed to be doing, i.e., gathering foreign intelligence to help defend the U.S., can be boiled down to these 5 things. 1. Arms, drug running. 2. Mind control. 3. Installation, assassination. 4. Subversion/propaganda. And 5. Terrorist creating, arming, funding and training. Let's take a brief look at each of these. Arms and drug running. Arms and drugs have been a mainstay of the CIA since its 1947 inception. The White House has always condoned the operations since it allowed the CIA to raise funds off the books for its extracurricular and extrajudicial activities, i.e., assassination, subversion, foreign meddling, etc. Whether it's cocaine from South America or heroin from the poppy fields of Afghanistan and the Golden Triangle, Vietnam and other areas of Asia, the CIA are master drug runners. Former narcotics investigator Mike Ruppert was forced out of the LAPD in 1977 when he exposed evidence of drug trafficking by the CIA. Many ex-CIA agents have blown the whistle on CIA drug running. For instance, Chip Tatum, who worked in black operations, was involved in the drug smuggling trade between the U.S. and Central American countries. He personally flew a plane with cargo which, he later discovered, turned out to be cocaine. Tatum was threatened not to speak out, but despite that he exposed the lurid details of the Mena, Arkansas cocaine smuggling ring, Bill Clinton's involvement, and how George H.W. Bush had Barry Seal and Manuel Noriega assassinated. Los Angeles was chosen as the distribution point for flooding the American streets with crack cocaine. The early forerunner of the CIA, the OSS, began to investigate the use of mind-altering substances like mescaline, scopolamine and marijuana. It then famously moved into experimenting with psilocybin, from magic mushrooms, and lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. The CIA was also behind the introduction of LSD to the American public in the 1960s, partly as a giant experiment, partly as an offshoot of its MKUltra/mind control programs, see below, and partly to weaken the population. CIA arms running or gun running has also been a consistent theme through the agency's history, including the Iran-Contra affair or even Benghazi in 2012. When the CIA was using an American diplomatic compound in Libya to run guns to moderate Syrian rebels trying to destabilize the legitimately elected government of Bashar al-Assad. Mind control. The CIA pioneered invasive mind control. In the 1940s, it absorbed Nazi war criminals into its structure via Operation Paperclip. It then conducted operations such as Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. Artichoke became Project MKUltra on April 13, 1953. The MK stood for mind control, using the German word, control, in deference to the Nazis' scientists at the CIA who helped develop the program. CIA agent Richard Helms chose Drive Cindy Gottlieb to run the TSS, Technical Service Staff, to develop what became MKUltra, with truth serum drugs and hypnotic techniques. Some of the techniques involved trauma to make the victim disassociate, split off, into multiple personalities, alters. The CIA killed biological warfare scientist Frank Olson, using drugs and chemicals to produce altered and vulnerable states in subjects, who they could mind control for various purposes. Installation/assassination. The CIA has become synonymous with installation of foreign puppet regimes and assassination, and the list is far too long to spell out, but it includes Iran 1953, Guatemala 1954, Vietnam 1954-58, Hungary 1956, Laos 1957-1973, Haiti 1959, Cuba 1961, Ecuador 1963, Brazil 1964, Indonesia 1965, Greece 1967, Bolivia 1968, Uruguay 1969, Cambodia 1970, Chile 1973, Australia 1975, Afghanistan 1979, El Salvador 1980, Nicaragua 1981, Panama 1980, Romania 1989 and more up to the modern examples of Libya 2011, Syria 2011 and Ukraine 2014. Additionally, in the late 1950s, President Eisenhower and VP Nixon created a super-secret team of assassins composed of around 40 crack CIA agents. Operation 40, as it came to be known, was behind many of the most famous high-profile assassinations of the last 6 decades, including JFK, MLK, RFK, John Lennon, Che Guevara, Bob Marley and more. This assassination template is still used today, carried out against innocent citizens and peacemakers. The CIA had a hand in the infamous Operation Gladio. 1A. U.S. NATO stay-behind military force in Europe which was there to allegedly stop the spread of communism. Horrific false flag attacks were carried out by Gladio operatives, who would bomb places such as train stations and make it look like far-left communists were the villains. William Bloom describes the CIA's murderous activities as an American Holocaust. This scenario has been repeated so many times that the CIA actually teaches it in a special school, the notorious School of the Americas. It opened in Panama but later moved to Fort Benning, Georgia. Critics have nicknamed it the School of the Dictators and School of the Assassins. Here, the CIA trains Latin American military officers how to conduct coups, including the use of interrogation, torture and murder. The Association for Responsible Dissent estimates that by 1987, 6 million people had died as a result of CIA covert operations. Former State Department official William Bloom correctly calls this an American Holocaust. Subversion, propaganda. The CIA has become a master at subversion and propaganda, both within and outside of the U.S. It took over the media in the 1960s and 1970s with Operation Mockingbird, a now declassified project whereby the CIA infiltrated the mainstream media and had its pieces inserted into TV, newspapers and journals everywhere as news when they were nothing more than lies and propaganda. The late German journalist Udo Ulfkott admitted that many European journalists were on the CIA payroll, and have been ever since the CIA rolled out its first European propaganda station, Radio Free Europe in 1949. Reed, hero journalist who exposed CIA infiltration and manipulation of media found dead. Ex-CIA case officer Philip Pager worked in the CIA during the 1950s and finally left in 1968. He knew firsthand the CIA's subversive activities and terrorism in Central and South America. He became a whistleblower and author of several books exposing the agency. When the U.S. revoked his passport in 1979, he first lived in Grenada in 1980 until Bishop was overthrown by the U.S., then in Nicaragua until 1990 when the Sandinistas were overthrown by the U.S., then Germany and Cuba. The CIA created the CCF, Congress for Cultural Freedom, in 1950 to counter Soviet influence. The CCF was the hidden weapon in the U.S. Cold War arsenal. Whether they liked it or not, whether they knew it or not, there were few scientists, writers and historians in both Europe and America whose names were not in some way linked to this covert enterprise. The U.S. establishment operated a sophisticated spying program in the name of freedom of expression. All those things, including music and art, that you thought were just spontaneous were actually part of a hidden agenda. Terrorists creating, arming, funding, and training. The CIA has long gotten mercenaries to do its dirty work. For a fuller history of the long and close relationship between the CIA and Islamic terrorism, see my article Radical Islamic Terrorists, the best bad guys money can buy. Whether they're called Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, the Database, the FSA, Free Syrian Army, or ISIS, the CIA has created them, armed them, funded them and trained them. The CIA trained Osama bin Laden in the 80s and the U.S. government allowed a fundamentalist Islamic network to develop in America prior to 2001. Both bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were the convenient bogeymen after the false flag attack on September 11. Here is a list of the top 10 connections between the U.S. and ISIS. Even all of this doesn't fully outline the extent of the CIA's crimes, for it has also been involved in various NWO agendas such as geoengineering. Evergreen is a CIA front company used to disseminate chemtrails. 1947, formation of MJ-12. On what some researchers claim was September 24, 1947, although there is a lack of clarity over the exact date, another hugely significant event happened. Truman created a secret governmental group that had never before existed, which was deliberately set up to be above and beyond the law. Known as Majestic 12 or MJ-12, MJ-12, it was an ultra-secretive group who was entrusted with guarding the knowledge of the reality of the ET presence of Earth. It was so undercover that Congress didn't even know of its existence, let alone be empowered to subject it to oversight or accountability. UFO researchers Robert, Bob, Wood and his son Ryan Wood have put together the website MajesticDocuments.com, which contains a collection of alleged MJ-12 documents over the decades. They rate each one on their authenticity scale. On one such MJ-12 document, Truman wrote to then Secretary of Defense Forrestal, You are hereby authorized to proceed with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter this matter shall be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. Any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the office of the President following appropriate discussion with yourself, Drive Bush and the Director of Central Intelligence. MJ-12 certainly, at one point, could have been considered to be the most powerful organization in Earth, in the sense that they were tasked with handling the alien affair, an issue of life-changing import that no one else was allowed to know. It is unknown exactly in what form Majestic 12 exists today. According to the testimony of Dan Boris, MJ-12 are working for the Committee of the Majority, a Freemasonic organization which is coordinating alien contact with Earth and furthering the agenda of the New World Order. 1947, a year of infamy. 1947 truly was an incredible year, with so many incidents happening and groups being created, that it changed the course of the future of humanity. 70 years later, we are still shaped by what went on in that fateful year. We are just on the verge of discovering, collectively, the shocking reality of a breakaway civilization, of a secret space program. See William Tompkins and other whistleblowers for more details. That has been carried on behind our backs with our resources. The difference is that now the truth has leaked out, and there is a critical mass of people prepared to investigate these occurrences and confront their implications. MJ-12 was set up in an era where the authorities were terrified of sharing the truth in the belief that it would cause social upheaval and chaos. Now, things have changed. If our so-called rulers cannot reveal the truth to us, we will bypass them, find it out anyway and continue on a course of rendering them irrelevant.